Hello, this is Tony Blazier for the Motocross Vault presented by Blinzall. If you're in the market for some high-quality racing oil for your two-stroke or four, make sure you go to blinzall.com and use our discount code VAULT20 to save 20% at checkout. Thank you for all the support. Hello and welcome back to the Motocross Vault. My name is Tony Blazier, and what this video is going to cover is another one of my Blaze Reviews series. If you're not familiar with those, what I've done is I've owned a lot of ATVs and motorcycles over the years. I totaled them all up. It's a little over 50 at this point. And I've had a little bit of everything. I've had street bikes, dual-purpose bikes, motocross bikes, off-road bikes, and ATVs. And what this video is going to cover is the ATVs I've owned over the years. Now, I know a lot of you out there probably are, ATV haters. I know within the motocross community, there's a snobbery that goes on towards ATV guys. They call them couches and what have you else. I've never been that guy. I love ATVs. Now, I've never raced them. I've only taken one on a motocross track a couple of times. For me, they were always like off-road bikes, play bikes. I've always ridden motocross and off-road about 50-50. I live here in Virginia. My parents had, 30 acres up on a mountain when I was a kid. So we had trails through the woods. My quote-unquote motocross track was really almost like a hare scrambles track with jumps. You can see some of the videos on the channel here where I'm riding around. It's really through the woods. So I grew up riding the woods. I love the woods. And ATVs are fun in the woods. To me, they're awesome for that. I've had all kinds of ATVs over the years. I haven't had nearly as many ATVs as motorcycles, though. Obviously, my first love is motocross, but I just think ATVs are fun. Like I said, taken within their own context, I never felt really comfortable jumping them. That's where I would draw the line. Anytime you jump them, if you come up a little bit short, the wheelbase is so short, and if you land a little cockeyed or something, it can be pretty sketchy. So that part of it, I prefer to keep it on the ground, or at least low to the ground for the most part, but I love riding them. I think they're a hoot and they're a good time. So what this video is going to cover is all the ATVs I've owned. As I said, it's not nearly as many as the motocross bikes, but I've had a pretty good variety of them. Everything from like little play bikes to more serious like race type quads to I even had one utility quad. And ironically, the one I've owned the longest is a 4x4. That's mainly because the 4x4 was great for actually building the trails. We would blaze the trails with the big heavy four-wheel drive, four-wheelers, and then beat them down and then cut them. We used them to cut in the trails up at my parents' place, so they were great for that. And if you ever want to ride in the wintertime in the snow, whatever, they're super fun. So they all have their usage, and like I said, if you haven't tried them, don't knock them. They're actually a lot of fun as long as you keep in mind what they're designed for and use them for that purpose. So if you want to check out the other reviews I've done, I did a separate review of all the 125s I've owned, the 250s, and the open bikes. And again, this is going to be a little different than the classic reviews I normally do, where I go through what the magazines thought of the individual machines. I look at all the tests, the shootouts, and compile that information, kind of, tell you a little bit about what the editors of these magazines thought. This is just my opinion. This is just my personal experience with these quads, what I thought about them. And the other Blaze reviews I've done were the same thing. I took, my CR125s and whatever else it was, and just told you what I thought of my personal opinion. Everybody has maybe their own individual opinion about certain motorcycles and ATVs and what have you, and this is just going to be mine. I know yours might vary, so don't take it personal if I hated one, or actually, I haven't really had many ATVs I really hated, but if I'm sure some of your personal experiences might be different than mine. So just keep that in mind. This is just my use. Like I said, even the sport ones, I wasn't using them for track use. I was really riding them in the woods, which is around my little motocross track. But again, it's not like I went out to Glen Helen on them or something. So if you're using your quad for high-level motocross, you're going to have a different opinion than me. So this is just my little rundown of the individual ones I've owned over the years and what I thought of them. If you want to support what I do, I have Motocross Vault merch available. This is one of the t-shirts just with the logo. I have several different versions of this available. They also have some great ones, well, I think they're pretty cool anyway, with some really neat bikes on them, and you can find them in the description below at my Teespring store. And if you want to support the channel, I would very much appreciate it. If you can subscribe, like, and share on social media, I would very much appreciate that as well. So here's the story of my personal ATVs. All right, the first ATV and our ATV rundown that I owned was the 1988 Yamaha Blaster. Now, I grew up around ATVs. Like I said, I didn't have a motorcycle when I was little, but my next door neighbor, who's my brother-in-law now, he had three-wheelers when we were kids, and I certainly rode them and crashed them a lot. Like I said, three-wheelers never really did it for me. Every time I got on one, I killed myself. So I wasn't super psyched about the three-wheelers, but then another buddy of mine, when we were in high school, ended up getting a Yamaha Blaster. Actually, it was just after high school. It was just after I graduated. He had a Blaster, and I rode it, and I was like, this thing is a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, and again, at the time I was living in Point Rocks, Maryland, And this is all developed now, but back then there were just this huge network of trails and horse field behind us and just all these places to ride. We'd ride all over God's green earth. And you need that, but you need to have something that was quiet. You couldn't, at the time I had my 78 CR 250, and that thing was loud. I mean, really loud. I remember my neighbor told me I was making his life a living hell riding that thing around the backyard. So that wasn't too awesome. But my buddy Brian Ross had an 88 Blaster. He got it brand new. He was also the guy that famously had the Yamaha BW200 that caused me to get a fat cap, but that's a disastrous story for another day. So anyway, I rode his Blaster, and I was like, this thing is a lot of fun. So this is when the Blaster first came out, and I think it was maybe $2,000, brand new. It was really, they're really inexpensive, and I picked up a lightly used one for about $1,500. And I remember his was red, and mine was blue. And this thing was super fun. I really, really enjoyed this quad. A couple things that were awesome about it. The motor, it had, I think, maybe there's probably used some kind of a dual sport motor. It wasn't the same engine that was on the IT200, I don't believe, but it was very peppy for what it was. If you've ever ridden a Blaster, they actually have a lot of power for a little 200. I was surprised how peppy it was. Even compared to like a 125 at the time or something, it was strong, much stronger torque. Really responsive engine. Didn't pull real far on top, of course. The stock exhaust is super choked off and quiet, but super snappy, great for pulling wheelies, and just a fun little motor. It would sit there and happily idle all day, ran like a top. Really a phenomenal engine, great little engine. I love that part of it. Started real easy. I love that little part of it. What didn't work so well, at least for me, the suspension on that thing was very, very stiff and not very good. You know, we were actually taking those things around like motocross tracks and stuff. I mean, homemade motocross tracks, nothing like a major one. But we were actually trying to motocross them around. We had a little track out there in Point Rocks, and man, you got the thing in a set of whoops and that little short wheelbase, hard suspension, it would just swap and bounce. And I remember one time Brian got into a set of whoops, and each whoop he hit, the rear end would come higher. It went like 3 times, and it finally just went end over end. So the short wheelbase and the mediocre suspension, you had to be a little careful with those. I know the hot setup at the time was they sold little extenders to make the wheelbase a little longer. And of course, if you could afford it, you could get some shocks. But I'm just out of high school. I'm going to community college at the time, so I didn't have any money for anything like that. So we pretty much rode them stock. I think the only mod I did to that bike was I replaced the stock silencer with like an FMF, which opened up the power a little bit, but not a huge amount. The thing was great. Had oil injection. You could just put we ride up to the gas station in Point Rocks, put straight gas in it. As long as you kept your oil tank full, it was great. It was awesome for that. Probably the weakest link in the whole Blaster was this first generation. Early on, it had drum brakes in the front and a mechanical disc in the back. And this was in '88 when the bike was brand new. I remember I wore out the brakes on it, the front shoes and the pad in the back. And Yamaha had the replacements on back order. I would try to get them from Fredericton Yamaha. They couldn't get them. So I literally rode this quad around for like a month with basically no brakes. I almost killed myself on it at one time. I'm a kid, I'm an idiot, I would never, ever, ever do that now. But back then we didn't care. We rode whatever. No matter if the thing was falling apart, we would ride it. So the brakes were sketchy. Even when they were new, the drums, you hit them and they would lock at different. It wasn't like a hydraulic system where it equalized pressure. One wheel would pull a little more than another. And they didn't work real well. And that mechanical disc was kind of a light switch. But overall, super fun quad. It was a little submarine. I enjoyed the hell out of it in spite of the fact that the suspension was terrible and the brakes were pretty terrible. For what it was, at the price point it was a screaming value. Years later, I'd have like the Honda competition, the 250X, and in every way, the 250X was superior to the Blaster except for price. And the Blaster was great, affordable, great starter ATV, and one of my favorite machines I owned at that time for sure. And I would highly recommend it. If you can pick one up cheap, they're fun little quads as long as you keep in mind what they're designed for. Now, I had that Blaster for maybe about a year or so. Like I said, we had a lot of fun with them. They were super fun quads. But at some point, I decided I really wanted to focus more on motorcycles. As I said, when I first got the Blaster, I think I had my 78 CR250. But then somewhere during the year when I had the Blaster, I picked up a 1987 KX125, which was maybe a year or two old at that point. And that was the bike that really got me started at racing. That was the first machine. I went to Antietam over in Hagerstown, Maryland. I raced that bike, and that was another buddy of mine had an 85 CR125, Trenton Thomas, and we decided, we were going to focus more on motocross at that point. So this was the bike where I really kind of cut my teeth, started to learn a little bit more. The Blaster was fun to kind of teach me a little more of the basics of riding. Like, so when I had my 78, I really just rode it up and down my driveway at my parents' place. I never took it to a motocross track. I had no access to any of those things at the time. So it was during that year transition, around 88 or so, that I kind of started to become more interested in motocross. And I eventually sold the Blaster. And really for the next, I don't know, almost a decade, I was exclusively on dirt bikes. I was, racing a lot. I had many dirt bikes over those years, and I really kind of got out of the quad thing. I lost interest in it more or less. I think part of it was I started hanging out with other guys that were into motocross more, and I moved away from Point of Rocks. My buddy Brian, who was more of an ATV guy, it was always kind of like, you're around a bunch of buddies riding a certain kind of thing, and you're like, oh, that'll be fun, I'll do that. Then you get in with another group of friends, and they're doing something different. So I was kind of like that. I got away from the ATVs there for a while. Now, somewhere in the mid-90s, I'm thinking maybe 96, 97, I got the bug to try and get one just to ride at my parents' place. Again, they still have all these trails up there. So I ended up picking up a used 1993 Yamaha Warrior. The Warrior was a real popular quad. I know a lot of people love them. I remember the thing that attracted me to was electric start, if I remember right. I thought that was really nice. You don't have to worry about pull starting it or anything, which, kickstarting the Blaster, you could kickstart that thing with your hand, pretty much. It was easy. 4-strokes, though, especially if you had to pull start them, they were a bitch. I remember my brother-in-law always had those ATCs that had the pull start 4-strokes, and it was a nightmare. So I like the electric start. I ended up getting this thing. I just hated this quad. Now, again, to be fair, I know a lot of people love them. It felt like a tank. Maybe it was because I had spent so many years on dirt bikes. Going back to the quad, it just felt heavy and cumbersome, and I didn't think it handled very well. It's certainly much bigger than a Blaster. It's got to be, 20% bigger or more. The Blaster, if you sit on it now, it's kind of hard. I can't believe I wrote the thing because it feels so tiny. Like, it feels like a mini. Super short wheelbase, not much room there. I ended up actually taking the front fenders off mine to give me a little more room to climb all around it. And I just didn't gel with this quad. I only kept it maybe a month or two. I rode it a few times. Just didn't like it. Like I said, it felt like it weighed 500 pounds, and I guess I assumed that with being a 350, it'd be pretty quick. It wasn't. I was really disappointed. Just didn't gel with this quad, so I got rid of that one pretty quickly. It's actually by far the quad I had the least amount of time. It was only, like I said, a couple months, and it was adios amigo. After the Warrior experiment, I knew that I really liked riding the quad for trail riding. It was super fun. I really enjoyed the experience of riding in the trails, but I wanted something a little bit different. And I ended up picking up a well-used 1987 TRX 250X FourTrax. I remember wanting one of these so badly when they came out in 1987, I guess it was. I ended up getting the Blaster, as I said earlier, just because the Hondas were much more expensive. It had to be at least, I don't know, a third more or something. I don't remember the exact price, but I remember the Honda was much more expensive, but it was a larger machine where the Blaster was very cramped. The 250X is much more, it's like a size, I think it's basically the size of a 250R, maybe a little bit smaller, but I found it to be much more comfortable. The main difference is everything else other than the power was way better. I mean, the Blaster might have had a little more pep because it was a 2-stroke, but the suspension on the 250X, really good, way better. I mean, it's not great for a motocross track, but for the kind of stuff I was doing, just hopping over little jumps, maybe catching a foot or two of air in the woods, over logs and what have you, it worked awesome. It was super plush. It really is an XR 250 for the quad world. Very reliable. They're stone reliable. That thing was a claw hammer. You'd ride it all day, no radiator to break. We'd be puttering around the trails, and it never would heat. It was just a really, really great machine. The disc has, all around disc brakes. The brakes are like quantum leap better than the Blaster's drums, which are just garbage. Really a much higher performance machine in every way except the motor, which was very torquey, very mellow. I thought it was great. Great for trail use. Not fast by any means. I mean, as you can imagine, a 400-pound 254 stroke would not be a rocket ship. And this is a very low-tech motor. Again, it's very much like an XR. It's a really fun quad. I enjoyed the hell out of this thing. I had it like maybe a year. I got it thinking that I would get it and I'd let my wife ride it. And she ended up riding it a couple of times and ended up rolling it, and that was the end of that. I don't think she's ever been on a dirt bike or quad since. She did it twice and crashed, said, I have no interest in this. That's where you know if you're really into it. If you're into it and you crash, you're like break an arm or whatever, you're like, well, I'll get back on later. If you crash and you're like, I'm done, you're like, well, you're just not cut out for it. So she was not cut out for that. So what I had this, like I said, a quad maybe a year, and what it turned out to suck is I bought it from Shenandoah Honda in Winchester. Turns out that quad had been stolen. The person who had stolen it had then traded it into Shenandoah Honda, and I had subsequently bought it for like $1,200 around 1997 or so. And the cops called me, said, "Hey, do you have this quad?" And I said, "Yeah." And I showed up at my house, checked the VIN, they had it stolen, they took it. And I was like, "Oh, crap." So I contacted Shenandoah Honda, and, to their credit, they refunded my money. So I got to use this thing for like a year or so and got my money back. So that was pretty good. Sucked because I liked the thing a lot. The only thing that sucked about it was the motor was hard to start when it got hot. This version did not have the electric start. The later ones would get. And unfortunately, if it got hot, it was a bear to start it. But other than that little thing, it was a phenomenal quad. And if you're looking for a cheap, fun trail bike that's, super reliable, I would definitely recommend one of these. All right, so after the 250X was unfortunately parted from my company, I decided I wanted to get something similar to play with. And again, I'm just using these for like trail bikes, essentially like an XR or something. Some buddies and I were like riding the quads up at my parents' place. So I wanted to do something similar. Now, it wasn't as easy as just finding another 250X. At this point, the 250X that was like 10 years old, I guess it was probably 97, 98. And although there were newer versions, I was, looking for something inexpensive. And of course, it wasn't as easy as getting on Facebook Marketplace or even eBay. Maybe eBay was maybe just coming out around this time. And it was just much harder to find stuff. You'd go to the One Ed Weekly or local cycle trader or something to find something. So eventually what happened was I found a well-worn 1987 Kawasaki Mojave. Now, I never really cared for the looks of the Mojave, or as my buddy Brian Ross used to call it, the Mojave. I always thought it looked really goofy. The giant fenders on the front were not very attractive. It was much less sleek than the 250X, and in my opinion, at least, way less attractive than a Blaster. Even I just, for my money, by far the least attractive. And always funny because the Takati 4 was always, in my opinion, at least the most attractive of the sport quads. And this Mojave was just a strange machine. Now, it was very different than the 250X, even though they really were direct competitors. The Honda used a very simple air-cooled 4-valve per cylinder engine. This Kawasaki used a liquid-cooled engine that I believe was based off the dual-sport engine in the KLR 250, which was, obviously no rocket ship, certainly nothing like a KX250F would be. But compared to the very mellow Honda motor, it was much more revvy, I guess. I don't know that it necessarily made more power, but the power band was way higher up. The Honda is really all low to mid. If you try to rev it, it just makes noise. It doesn't pull on top at all, which is perfect for the woods. It's fine for what I wanted it for. But the Kawasaki is the exact opposite. Maybe because it was derived from a street engine, it was made to rev. It didn't have a lot of torque. I remember it was really hard to get it to pull a wheelie. You like the Honda, you just blip the throttle, pop the clutch, and the Mojave, you really had to rev it up and like just gun the crap out of it. And it just didn't have that torque. It was a rev monster, and I just never really gelled with it. I didn't like the handling. It felt, I'm not sure on paper exactly how close they are, but it felt significantly heavier than the Honda. I'm sure the liquid cooling adds a little bit of weight, but I think it was more the chassis, the way the motor run, all those intangible things that make it feel different. And to me, at least, it felt like a big, heavy, not particularly fast a quad. I didn't really care for it. I had it for a little while. We played around in the woods. It was all right, but again, this was definitely not one of my favorites. I never liked the styling of it, and I don't think I even kept it a year. Basically, you get it, you flip it in a couple months, and you call it a day. After I got rid of the Mojave, I realized that the quad I had enjoyed the most was that 250X. It was great all-around quad, had reverse gear, great suspension, handled very well. Like I said, a really nice mix of stability and turning. Awesome little woods machine. I love that thing. And Honda had an updated version of it, which at that point had transitioned to the 300EX. Around, I don't know, maybe 92 or 93 is when they made that transition. That was kind of when I was more into bikes. I wasn't really into quads at that point. So the newer version had electric start, which again was one of the things I hated about really the only thing I didn't like about that 250X was it was a bear to start when it got hot. So I went down to my local dealer, which at the time was Loudon Motorsport here in Leesburg, Virginia, and picked up a brand new 2000 Honda 300EX. I loved this quad. The only thing I didn't like about it was they made some weird styling choices here. They added this little funky cowl to the handlebars, which I hated. It looks stupid. They're trying to make it more aerodynamic. It was made to look like a Ford Taurus or something. The bike was already had kind of that interesting look to the bodywork anyway, and I didn't like that. So I had the idea. I went and bought the headlight cowling that was originally on my 1987 250X, and it would bolt right on. Then you would ditch all that crap and it ended up going with like some DG bars or something. I replaced the bars with some aftermarket ones with a straighter bend. The other thing was the bend. You had this cowling, you couldn't change the handlebars. The cowling wrapped around the handlebars. The handlebars had a really far back sweep to them, like it was a handlebar from like 1987 or something, back in the old days when the handlebars were not as straight. I didn't really like that. So that allowed me to replace the handlebars, and it looked way better. Other than that, the only mod I did to this quad was I replaced all the tires with ITB hole shots. They became kind of my go-to tire for ATVs. Love the hole shots. They wore well. They slid real well. They're much lower profile. The standard tires on these things, if you went with the standard tire, they were really balloony and they rolled the Otsus. They would roll in the turns, and the quad would, be pretty easy to flip it. So, but when you went with a harder, lower profile, tougher tire, it really improved the handling. And so I always went with hole shots. Other than that, I left this quad completely stock. And I had this thing for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, if maybe more. It was I had a long time. I love this quad. It's a great little quad. Super quiet, which was real important to me. I didn't want to piss off the neighbors. And reliable as a stone axe. The only thing I ever replaced on it was I made the mistake of letting this idiot kid ride it one time, and he hit a tree, and he just destroyed it for about $1,500. Broke off one of the front wheels, busted the axle carrier in the back, bent the rear axle. He hit it really fast, broke his arm, and jacked his shoulder up, and flipped it pretty bad and almost totaled the damn thing. Other than that, other than crash abuse, this thing was completely bulletproof. Great quad. Loved it. I wish I still had it. I never should have sold the damn thing. Really, really, really great quad. And like, again, that's another one. Again, my favorite all-time quad in terms of actually the most I rode and the most fun I had on it was probably that 300EX. Yes, I had many more higher performance ones, but general use, I could let my little sister would ride it. That's another thing too, is that, friends of mine, if we were going to go ride together, that was the one I let my buddies ride. Ones that had not much experience, like some, my little sister could handle it. My wife could handle it if she was so inclined. It had enough power to be fun, not so much that somebody was going to kill themselves unless they were a complete moron. I mean, you can still hurt yourself, clearly, that one guy, but great all-around quad, and maybe my number one all-time seed for dollar per fun value. Now, as I said, I absolutely loved that 300EX, but I decided I thought I wanted a little something more higher performance. My little sister was doing a lot of riding with us at the time. We were doing some trail riding at my parents' place, and I thought it'd be fun to get a second quad and let her ride the 300EX. So Honda at the time had come out with a new high-performance quad, the 400EX. And it was based, I think, on a modified version of the XR400, which, an XR400 is not a rocket ship, but the 300EX is really not a rocket ship. It's a fun little quad, but slow. Let's be honest, it's slow. I thought it'd be fun to have something a little more high performance, and I thought that that 400EX looked badass. I love the looks of it. It was a great looking quad. It had those cool little headlights in the front and stuff, and I thought it was a really handsome machine, and I thought it'd be cool to have something, like I said, to ride. So I went in and bought another brand new quad. I bought a brand new 400EX 2000 model, and I maybe only had that for about 6 months. So what's funny is, I think for a lot of people, the 400EX was probably a better quad. Certainly way more powerful. But again, what I was riding it in was just tight trails at my parents' place. Really wasn't taking it to a track or anything really wide open. And I actually always went back to the 300EX and liked it better. The 400EX had way more torque. I thought the power was a little bit too abrupt off idle. It had not a ton of top end, but really strong tip in when you gave it the throttle. And it was kind of herky-jerky, and I just never really was as comfortable with it. I think, if I remember, I don't think it had reverse gear either, too. That was a real bitch. After having the reverse gear in the 300, not having reverse sucked in the tight woods. Again, you're riding out in the dunes or something, you don't notice that, but if you're blazing trails and these single tracks everywhere and stuff, not having reverse gear sucked. So I just didn't really like the 400EX as much. I ended up selling it. I think I sold it to my buddy Jamie Conard, my best friend, if I remember right. Yeah, I think he bought it off of me about 6 months after I bought it myself. I don't think he had it long after that. But anyway, we go through bikes quite a bit, and yeah, if I remember right, I think I sold it to him, and so that was one of the ones I had not very long. I regret that now. I wish to God I'd kept it. I'd love to pick up one now. They're really cool quads. At the time, it just didn't gel with me, and I probably regret that as maybe the one I wish I hadn't sold the most. After I got rid of the 400EX, I went a couple years where I just had the 300EX. It was just kind of like a spare bike if somebody wanted to ride, if we were going to go trail riding or something. I kept it at my parents' place in the shed. I didn't keep it at my house here. I didn't truck it back and forth. It was just one of those things where if I got a wild hair, I went up to visit my mom or something, and I wanted to go for a quick spin, I'd pull the 300EX out. If it was a snowy day or something, go up there and blast around the snow. riding ATVs in the snow, if you're into that, is like the awesomest fun you can have on four wheels. Super fun. So I really wasn't looking for anything high performance anyway. Like I said, again, just trail riding, so I was happy with that. Somewhere around 2002 or 3, I got a wild hair that I wanted to try and get something, again, more high performance. I don't know what got over me. I'm always looking for something new and interesting to pick up. And I saw this really clean, I mean, immaculate 250R FourTrax on eBay. And I snatched that thing up. And when I got it, it was even more amazing than I thought in the pictures. You never can tell for sure with pictures. You're like, well, maybe it's nice, and maybe it's, you know, somebody just kind of painted it up and made it look really nice. But this thing was like all original. It had the original tires on it. It was amazing. The stock exhaust, and the thing, it felt brand new. I remember, like I said, when we were young, the guys down, my brother-in-law, he was into three-wheelers. He had a 250R ATC. I'd ridden a couple times. Again, did not like it. Was very terrified of this thing. And the FourTrax version just handled so much better. Wasn't quite as fast because of the added weight, but it was a really nice engine for what it was. You got it out in the open. We took it out in some fields, and it was fast. The brakes worked great. It was just it really rode like it was brand new off the showroom floor. This thing was amazing. But the problem was I had it, and again, we're riding in the woods. You know, I take it up in the woods and tight, like single track and blazing trails with it, and it just didn't have the torque of that 300EX. It was really wanted to go. If you got it out on a fire road or something, super fun. I'm sure on a motocross track, it's great. I never got a chance to take it onto any kind of a track. I wish I had, but you know, for that kind of thing, it was pretty, I mean, gosh, they raced them for almost, I don't know, 15 years. It was like the racing quad for over a decade after they discontinued it after 89. And these were great, great quads. I had it for about a year and a half, I think, if I remember right. And again, I rode it sparingly. It was one of these quads that was so beautiful, I didn't want to ride it because I was afraid I'd hurt it. And you can't, I remember even at the time just trying to find some replacement stuff. I couldn't get the decals. There weren't people making replicas, and the plastic, you could not get the plastic. It wasn't around. Everybody pretty much had snatched up all the OEM stuff. Because again, Honda, people were racing these things for 20 years. You could get some Meyer stuff that was like cheeseball looking, but there wasn't the OEM. And my bike was all OEM original. I didn't want to hurt it. So I just kind of let it sit most of the time. Eventually, I decided that you know, somebody offered me like $4,000 for it, and I was like, wow, that's a pretty good deal. At the time, I could probably sell it for a lot more than that now. This is 2004, I think, and I sold it. I ended up selling it. It was I really wasn't riding it much, so I thought maybe I'd get something else to be a little more practical, that actually ride and not worry about hurting it. It was more like a garage queen, and it was a beautiful quad, gorgeous machine, but you know, for the kind of riding I was doing, it wasn't really ideal. After I got rid of the 250R, I took that money and I bought a brand new Suzuki LTZ 400 Quadsport. Now, this was, I think the Quadsport came out the year before in 03. I think mine was the second year. I wanted the yellow one. I ended up getting a white one. But this was a great, great machine. And it was really more suited for what I wanted to do, which was really wide in the woods. I think I basically bought it for what I sold that Honda for, maybe $100 or $200 more. It was, you know, mid $4,000, $4,500 maybe range. This was a similar machine to the 400EX in spirit, but way more performance in terms of technology and what have you. I liked it a lot better than the 400EX. In terms of actual performance, this is my favorite quad I've owned. That engine was derived from, I think, the one that was in the DRZ 400, which I actually had a dual sport of. Great motor. The power was, it didn't come on as strong off idle as the 400EX did, but it was a longer pull and it was a more linear pull. It was just like this long electric pull. You know, it was decently fast. I remember a buddy of mine had picked up the 450 Honda when it first came out, and it's a stock, not modified. And I remember riding it, and it wasn't that much slower. I mean, it wasn't like these, you know, the 450 high performance quads, you know, they're so choked off stock, so they're really a mild state of tune. But stock for stock, it was decently fast, but it was really tractable. Suspension was super plush. I like the suspension, probably the best suspension of any quad I've ever owned. In terms of for what I'm doing, I'm sure on a motocross track, maybe the Honda was better, but trails and just like going around my little woodsy motocross track, it worked great. This was a fantastic little quad. Electric start, reverse gear, everything you'd want in a quad. I love that thing. super fun. I think the reason I eventually sold, one thing about Suzuki's, the quality is not quite there, compared to a Honda. And little stuff like, I remember the skid plate on this thing underneath the quad was plastic, and I ended up taking it. It was really rocky up at my parents' place up on top of the mountain there, and I ended up having the chain get derailed in the middle of nowhere because I hit a rock and that stupid plastic covered it and protected hit the sprocket, bent it, derailed the chain. Little stuff like that, little things that would break on that thing that just, my 20-year-old 250R didn't have these problems. So I got a little disillusioned with it. I got pissed at it. It ended up throwing a chain, wadded the chain up, bent the, wadded up the chain, bent against the shift shaft, broke the cases. I had to get that fixed. It really soured me on the experience. Like, I love the performance of this quad, but I had a couple of problems with it where it stranded me 2 or 3 times, and I was over it. I was like, well, screw this Suzuki piece of crap. In spite of the fact that I love the way it worked, it was just the little stuff. It just, again, maybe my bad luck. Maybe I'm sure plenty of you guys have had quad sports out there, never had a bit of a problem. I had a lot of little issues with it, and it just kind of soured me on the machine. So I ended up selling it. I probably had it a year or so. So great performance. Again, nothing against mine. Maybe I just had bad luck. I think they're good little quads, but in my experience, it just wasn't maybe as well put together, and was more at least vulnerable to damage, it seemed like, than some of the other ones I've had. After I got rid of the Quadsport, I actually went a completely different direction because I wanted something more comfortable. What I ended up doing is when I had the Quadsport, I went riding with a bunch of buddies of mine. The guy who actually had that FourTrax, the 450 sport quad, I don't know what they called it, whatever, the 450R, and he actually owned a Prairie, which was a big V-twin 4x4, and we were riding out at his place, which is, I don't know, outside of Leesburg here. I don't remember exactly where it is, but a bunch of rocky trails and stuff, and he let me ride his Prairie, and this thing was like a Cadillac. I was like, wow, this thing is awesome. If you're never in the Prairie, it actually has a 700cc V-twin. This is before they came out with the brute force. And the damn thing, in spite of the fact that it's an automatic transmission, it is a rocket. I mean, if you whack the throttle, this big 700-800 pound machine would loft the front end. It was like, holy Christ. And I remember riding it, and it was so comfortable, where my quad sport would beat the crap out of you over rocks and roots and everything. You're constantly shifting it and blah, blah, blah. This thing was like the Cadillac. It was so great. I loved it. And I actually went, this is, I think, 2005. I went and rode the new Suzuki version, which was, they had independent suspension on it, and it was a beautiful looking machine. Actually looked much better. The Prairie had really great performance, but it looked cobby. And the Suzuki all had independent rear suspension, which made them very tippy. And what I wanted was a sport feel. I wasn't looking for comfort as much as handling. Big and heavy always made me a little nervous, so I wanted it to handle and feel more like my 300EX or something. And the thing about the Prairie was it had a live axle, so it was way more stable and a much lower center of gravity. If you park a Prairie next to one of the modern, like I said, a Grizzly sits up 2 inches taller, and I ride like a buddy of mine's Grizzly, and the thing feels like it's going to roll in the corners and tip over. They always feel super sketchy to me. And the Prairie, though, for a machine as big as it is, it feels like a sport quad. And I could see how you could take the racks off of it and actually ride it in GNC. I could actually go pretty damn fast on it. And you could do donuts with it and pull wheelies, and actually you could jump it. I jumped the thing. You can jump it a couple feet in the air. The thing, I said, like, great suspension. As far as work quads go, the Prairie was like the bomb. I loved it. It was really fun. And that is the quad I had the longest of anything I've ever owned. I had that quad, geez Louise, probably 13 years. Now, I didn't put a ton of use on it. I sold it to my buddy Jamie a couple of years ago because I just stopped riding it. It was sitting at my dad's house, and it had less than 300 miles on it. And I never took it anywhere. It stayed at my dad's house. Again, it was my go up there and ride the trails in the wintertime or beat the trails down, get a couple of buddies to come over. I'd pull out the quad. Actually, I blew out my ACL. I've done my ACL twice. And that was the thing that I got to ride after while I was letting my knee healed up. I didn't want to get back on a dirt bike. So when my buddies wanted to ride, I rode the quad there for, a couple months after the surgery, just because you don't have to worry about dabbing your leg. It was a great quad. I love this machine. Like, again, if you're looking for utility machine that's got a sporty intention. They're great. Now, they don't make them anymore. Like I said, I think the Brute Force, which came after, is independent rear. They've all gone to independent rear, and I just don't like the way they handle. But my buddy Jamie still has that Prairie, still rides it. Took it out to Hatfield McCoy last year, and it's still a great quad and easily one of the best I've owned in terms of performance, and I loved it. It was a great machine for sure. All right, so we've come to the last quad I bought, although not the last one I owned. The one that I actually owned the longest and I had up until very recently was that 2005 Prairie. But the last quad I actually purchased was a 2004 Kawasaki KXF400, I believe, which is the equivalent to the LTZ 400. During the early 2000s, Kawasaki and Suzuki entered into an alliance where you got, yellow Kawasaki's and green Suzuki's. For a couple of years, they jointly developed the first generation of their 254-stroke. And for a couple of years, again, they cross-pollinated their lineup. So you could actually get a DRZ in green, and you could get a Quadsport in green as well. And that's what I bought. I loved that Suzuki performance, but I got aggravated with that particular one I had. And somebody here local in Leesburg had one for sale. And I was like, you know what? I love that quad. I'll get another one. Again, everything you could say about that first Suzuki, you could say about this. It's really the same bike with green plastic. I love the ergonomics. The suspension's great. The motor is perfect for a quad, in my opinion, for the kind of use you're going to use. It really is the perfect off-road kind of sporty quad motor. Not too fast, not too slow, just like Goldilocks. Love these things. They're comfortable. They shift well. The only thing that's a knock is, you better upgrade the skid plates. The quality of some of the components is not great. Kawasaki and Suzuki, again, in my opinion, typically maybe not quite as well put together as like a Honda, but the machine was performance-wise awesome, and I had it maybe a year and a half. I had a lot of fun with it. If I remember right, the reason I sold it was I ended up wanting to get, somebody had a KTM 540 525 SX with a 540 kit for sale, and I decided I wanted to get that. So I ended up selling the Kawasaki so I could get this KTM. At the time I had maybe 3 or 4 motorcycles in the garage and a quad, and my wife's like, you got to get rid of something or get something else. So anyway, it ended up getting sacrificed to the Moto gods for me to pick up this KTM open class 4-stroke. It was a really cool machine, so I don't regret that. But this Kawasaki is a cool bike. Again, they're great quads. Like as long as you don't break something on them or do something stupid with them, they're really reliable. I think in general, I think most people would say they're pretty bulletproof. My stuff was probably abuse. It's probably on me, so I'll take the abuse. I probably treated that quad sporting correctly. I had no failures with the Kawasaki version. It was perfectly reliable machine, good little quad. So that was the end of that story. So there you have it. That's a look back at the ATVs I've owned over the years. Like I said, I haven't had nearly as many ATVs as I've had dirt bikes, but I love them. I just recently thought about picking up another one. I like riding ATVs. As a guy with really bad knees, 3 knee surgeries, I like the fact that I don't have to dab my leg in the corners. Also, my hip is bad too. So there's something about the ATVs that is nice. That's why I kept that Prairie so long, is because I could ride that thing when I couldn't really ride a dirt bike as easily anymore. So it was getting a little bit physically getting tough on me. And the Prairie, because you could stand up everywhere, and the suspension was very plush and stuff. It was a great way to ride when physically maybe you're hindered a little bit. And ATVs, they allow you to ride year-round. They're super fun in the wintertime when my dirt bike would sit. If it snowed or whatever, the ground was frozen, the ATV didn't care. I think people who are haters maybe haven't given them a fair chance. I mean, I'm not saying, go out and trade in your CRF 450 and get a quad. For sure, dirt bikes are my first love. But quads can be super fun within their element, and I think I pretty much embrace all off-road machines of any kind, and I'm not sure why there's so much infighting. It's almost like the 2-stroke versus 4-stroke guys. There's the quad versus dirt bike guys, which is always stupid. You see a guy like Gary Denton, who was a phenomenal motocross racer and then transitioned to quads and a phenomenal quad racer, great at both. Or Barry Hawk, a guy who won the motocross, won the GNCC in dirt bikes and quads. So I think there's a lot of cross-pollination there. They are different, but they do require some of the same skills, and I love them. They're super fun. And so, like I said, if you ever tried one, give it a whirl. They're a good time. I definitely enjoy them and highly endorse them. So if you like this sort of thing, check out some of the other stuff I've done on my channel. Again, I did my Blaze reviews of my 125s, my 250s, and my 500s. I'm probably going to do one with my street bikes next. Street/dual sport. I've had, again, not as many street bikes. I've always been way more of a dirt bike guy, but I have had several dual sports and a few straight on street bikes. So I'll take a little time to tell you a little bit about what I thought about them. Some of them great, some of them not so great. So it's like anything. If you'd like to subscribe, I would appreciate it. Share on social media. Get the word out on the channel. That would be great. If you listen to this in podcast form, if you could rate and review it on iTunes, that would be super helpful as well. So until we meet again, this is Tony Blazer. Keep the rubber side down. Peace.